Hey guys, Matt here. I'll waste little time on pleasantries or explanations for my long absence. I've talked about that stuff and the nature of my career elsewhere. Instead, let's cut right to the chase. You guys know that I don't have much time for making versus videos at the moment, so I decided to try doing something else just to try to keep my content going and to stay in touch with you guys. I miss doing YouTube. I like to do it more often, I just can't do it. Years ago, Evan Nova made up a list of his favorite underrated Jedi. I decided to do something similar. Sit back and enjoy my tribute to the minor Jedi characters of the Legends timeline that I hope will never be forgotten. Juhani. Of all the memorable characters from the original iconic KOTOR duology, in my opinion, the hot-headed Cathar Juhani is the only Jedi character who I consider to be truly underrated. In some ways, I can understand why that is. She doesn't have the most compelling commentary on the game's main plot. She's not even an essential party member, as she can be killed early on in the game, and a fair amount of her dialogue options were cut, giving her less to say and do than the majority of your other party members. She's not even my personal favorite character. However, I still think she was a fantastic character and one well worth remembering. Prior to the outbreak of the Mandalorian Wars, the same conflict that brought the legendary figure Revan and his friend Malak to galactic fame, early acts of Mandalorian aggression helped mold Juhani into the being who would one day assist the former Sith Lord on his path to redemption. A victim of a brutal siege leveled against the planet Cathar, Juhani, like most of the rest of the surviving members of her species, was forced to abandon her ravaged homeworld by the invading Mandalorians. The man behind the genocidal attack on Cathar, Cassus Fett, instigated a series of attacks carried out by the Mandalorian forces and the mercenaries who fought alongside them. One especially enthusiastic participant in the slaughter of the Cathar people was the Twi'lek known as Zor, a figure who would test Juhani later during her Jedi career. An only child, Juhani and her family found themselves attempting to lead meager lives on the world Taris from the time when Juhani was only a few months old. Unfortunately for them, Taris was largely dominated by elitist groups of humans who looked down upon the so-called alien population that seemed to infest the planet. Juhani never felt that she was persecuted or oppressed in any overt sense. However, her life was one of tremendous hardship, and she experienced traumatic losses when first her father was killed in a drunken bar fight, and later her mother fell ill. Her mother worked hard but made too little money, and eventually borrowed heavily from the exchange in order to try to make ends meet. After her mother passed away, the exchange charged Juhani with her mother's debt and enslaved her. In her own words, she was bound like a beast and treated as livestock. An unimaginably awful situation to find oneself in, and a truly startling beginning for an eventual Jedi Knight. As Juhani was paraded about as a slave, she found herself in the furthest depths of humiliation when the man who had killed her father came to purchase her for her own at the auction block. But as it happened, the Jedi Revan was in the midst of taking the fight back to the Mandalorians, and along the way his forces collided with Juhani, freeing her from slavery, and in doing so, lived up to everything her imagination had ever made them out to be. From that day on, it became her goal in life to seek out the Jedi and join their order. And as she could touch the Force, her dream eventually became a reality. Still, several obstacles remained before her. The Cathar people were prone to quick tempers and were natural fighters. Their hot-blooded tendencies typically made the ways of the Jedi especially challenging for them. When Juhani struck her master in the midst of a duel, she regressed into a dark Jedi, having deluded herself into embracing the dark as an emotional response to her feelings of guilt over having thought she killed her master. However, Master Quattra's injuries were not so severe as she imagined, and with Revan's help she regained her devotion to the light and set out to accompany him on his quest for the Starforge. Along the way, she was again brought into conflict with Zor, who revealed himself as her father's murderer. With Revan's help, Juhani stopped herself from striking at the Twi'lek in rage, though the fool provoked an attack himself in the aftermath. While Juhani and her allies prevailed over the vile Twi'lek, who was killed in the confrontation, her conscience was clear as she had not struck in anger, nor with vengeance in her heart. Like most of the great franchises, Star Wars boasts the ability to place realistic, even seemingly normal people in extraordinary circumstances. Aside from the fact that she has force powers and looks like a cat, Juhani's life story is not so different from that of many real-world refugees who have existed throughout our history and continue to exist today. But her story is no less touching for that fact. In truth, she is in many ways made more relatable because the scope of her story is smaller in nature. Backed up by an excellent vocal performance tinged with an Eastern European accent that helps color the character's flight from a war-torn homeland, as well as hint at her species' feline nature, I find Juhani to be unforgettable and a truly underrated character. Tack on the fact that she had a ton of content and was actually intended to be revealed as Star Wars' first lesbian character, and you're left to wonder even more about the young Jedi's past relationships with her fellow apprentices, Dak Vesser and Viallet. And apparently, female Revan players may also have the ability to romance the character, however I really don't know firsthand as I've never played the game in that manner. But honestly, she didn't need that. Even considering the material that was not included in the game, Juhani remains one of my personal favorite KOTOR-era characters, and in my opinion is a sadly underrated Jedi. One of the best. Aryn Leneer. Considered to be one of the greatest warriors who fought for the Sith Emperor Viallet, Darth Malgus fought during the Sith Empire's war with the Republic, some 300 years after the redemption of Revan. Malgus fought and killed many prominent Jedi over the course of several pivotal and iconic battles waged over the course of the decades-long war. Eventually, he spearheaded the sacking of Coruscant when he brazenly led the attack on the Jedi Temple itself. The only Jedi who came close to rivaling his performance was the Master known as Ven Zallow, the former teacher and greatest friend of the Jedi Knight, Aryn Leneer. Aged in her early to mid-30s, Aryn Leneer was strong in the Force and proficiently skilled with the lightsaber, and at the time of her master's death, she had become a veteran of several battles and was in attendance at the sham peace negotiations held on Alderaan. The ruse had been orchestrated by the Sith leadership as a distraction designed to facilitate Darth Malgus' attack on Coruscant. Even from a distance that spanned immense space and time, Aryn Leneer felt the pain of her master's death. Her strength in the Force was as an empath. She felt deeply through her connections to others, perhaps too deeply for her own good. It had often been noted by her fellow soldier, Zerud Kor, that her resolve in the wake of the pain she experienced by proxy through her connection to the Force was a testament to her exceptional nature as she braved through the horrors of war on a near daily basis. However, this delicate straddling of the lines between morality, Jedi non-attachment, and her duty threatened to unhinge Aryn Leneer following Master Zellow's death. Angry at the Jedi Order's continued participation in the peace talks, and determined to find the Sith Lord responsible for her master's death, Leneer left Alderaan behind without permission from her superiors. Unbeknownst to her, Darth Malgus was also furious with his own superiors. He had been deceived into thinking his attack would culminate with the destruction of Coruscant. In actuality, his efforts merely provided the Empire with an excellent bargaining chip to use during their negotiations. As all of this was going on, Malgus was also playing a deadly game with his rivals, who had noticed his enduring fondness for a Twi'lek called Alina Daru. Unable to understand the politics his emperor was playing, and unwilling to let go of his attachment to Alina, Malgus found himself brooding over his disenchantment with the Empire, and began to reassess his loyalty, finding that he was truly devoted to conflict, which he believed the Force represented over and above all else, including the Empire itself. Having learned of Malgus's love for Alina, Aryn targeted the Twi'lek in a last mad effort to exact a toll on her master's killer. She wished not merely to kill him, but hurt him. She would do this by doing what he had done to her, kill the one he loved. But in the end, Aryn found that she could not hurt Alina. The Twi'lek had known so much pain in her life already. Aryn could not bring herself to add more. Although Darth Malgus defeated Aryn the second time they fought, he unexpectedly allowed her to keep her life, repaying the debt he owed the Jedi for sparing Alina's life. Malgus saw a great deal of himself in Aryn, and believed she was only a fraction of what she could otherwise be if she were to embrace her anger. Both had been betrayed by the other members of their order. Both had been brought low by their connections to a loved one. And as Malgus resolved to eliminate what he perceived as a weakness by killing the one he loved, Aryn deserted the Jedi Order in pursuit of forging a new bond with which to enrich her life. Joining Zirid Kor and his daughter Era on a homestead on Dantooine, Aryn finally found peace and happiness. Aryn Leneer was part of a great, though simple story, and more superficially, she was also pretty awesome as a Jedi. Leneer and Malgus fought each other twice. Over the course of the two duels, Aryn lasted longer in a pitched battle with Malgus than any other prominent Jedi character we were introduced to in the lead-up to the game's release. That, and the spectacular use of the Force she employed to save herself in Zirid Kor following the destruction of Zirid's ship Fat Man, which allowed them to survive plummeting through Coruscant skyways at terminal velocity, mark her as an extraordinarily powerful Jedi. While a bit cheesy, her story's ending is also decidedly triumphant in a very humble and satisfying way. She served as a remarkable hero and an excellent foil to Darth Malgus himself. As the Sith are said to be mirror images of the Jedi, Malgus was threatened only by his connection to another. Aryn, on the other hand, was sustained by the bonds she forged, and in the end found her salvation because of how deeply she was able to feel for the plight of others. The only reason I consider the character to be truly underrated is simply because I think she's not mentioned as often as she should be when people speak of truly exceptional or powerful Jedi. I've never actually encountered anybody who actively disliked the character, which is good. It's simply that, in her own right, I think she's done enough that she deserves to be mentioned when people discuss truly exceptional Jedi. In the wake of the events that led to her departure from the Order, it was thought by Aryn Leneer that if her master and the rest of the Jedi Order had failed in their charge, they had at least failed nobly, and there was something to that, something profound, something worthy. That very sentiment colored the life stories of another teacher and student thousands of years later. Anun Bandara and Darra Assant. Before Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan fought the Duel of the Fates, another pair of Jedi faced off against the fearsome Sith apprentice Darth Maul. A contemporary of such legends as Mace Windu and Qui-Gon Jinn, Anun Bandara served the Jedi Order in several capacities throughout his 40-some-odd years. In his time, he successfully trained 3 Padawans, each one attaining the rank of Knight, and for a time he lived amongst his own people on Ryloth, acting as the watchman of that sector of space. Confident in his own abilities and patient, though prone to bouts of fretfulness and misgiving where his students' safety was concerned, Bandara was looked upon by his students as one of the finest sword masters in the Jedi Order. As such, he was eventually elevated to the rank of Battle Master, a position which stationed him at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. There he was responsible for instructing some of the most talented Jedi initiates in the ways of the lightsaber, the young Kenobi himself being one such student. However, it was Anun Bandara's 4th and final Padawan who would entangle him in a web of conspiracy and murder that would lead both of the Jedi to their premature deaths. Darra Assant had been an orphan of 2 years from the planet Alderaan when she had been found and taken to the Jedi Temple by Anun Bandara. There, she trained alongside the young Obi-Wan Kenobi, whom she once defeated in a sparring match as the two learned to understand and manipulate the power of the Force from the great masters of the age. Darra never wished for anything more than to live up to her master's example. When the time came for her trials, which were designed to test whether she was ready to become a knight in full, Darra Assant had the misfortune of being assigned to the Crimson Corridor, a dangerous part of Coruscant, where she was sent to escort Ulth the Fondorian back to the Jedi Temple. Ulth was an informant who had survived the Sith-enacted assassination of the leadership of a crime syndicate known as Black Sun. In exchange for the Council's protection, Ulth had been prepared to share his knowledge of the attack, an action which would have alerted the Council to the return of the Sith well before Darth Sidious initially planned to reveal his hand. However, Ulth never got the chance. Hindered by self-doubt, and thus incapable of bringing her full might to bear, Darra failed her trial when first a street gang and later a swarm of savage creatures known as hawkbats attacked her and the alien in her charge. Although she dutifully reported this to her master, Anun Bandara accompanied her back to the Crimson Corridor without informing the Jedi Council. If even a chance of the Fondorian survival existed, Bandara wished to discover it firsthand without revealing his Padawan's failure. Unfortunately for the 2 Jedi, Darth Maul was also in the middle of a hunt for an information broker named Lorn Pavan and his companion, the droid I-5YQ. Pavan had obtained evidence of the Trade Federation's plans to impose a blockade on Naboo from the Neimoidian Hath-Manchar. This information could have proved to be the undoing of a plan that had been carefully laid out by Darth Sidious and his master Darth Plagueis, and so Maul had been dispatched to kill everyone who knew about the impending blockade and cover up any remaining evidence. En route back to the Jedi Temple, Anun Bandara and Darra Assant crossed paths with Lord Pavan and his droid in the midst of a tense chase with the Sith Lord bearing down upon them. Bandara turned control of his speeder over to his apprentice before leaping into the air to challenge the pursuing Darth Maul. Realizing he was no match for the Sith Lord's skill, Bandara fought bravely to the end, when he drew Maul in close before plunging his blade deep into Maul's speeder bike. Sacrificing his own life for his companions, Anun Bandara's actions caused an explosion that very nearly took the Sith apprentice down with him. Assant continued to protect Pavan and his droid, though their relationship was strained due to the fact that Pavan nursed a grudge against the Jedi for denying him the right to see his son, whom he had turned over to the Order for training without realizing he would not be able to maintain his relationship with his child. Eventually, Darth Maul caught up with the trio, and in the last desperate gambit that should have actually worked, Darsha and the droid came up with a plan to freeze Lorn and Carbonite, while Darsha dueled with the Sith, thus ensuring that the Jedi Order would learn of the return of the Sith. While Darsha proved to be no match for the Sith Lord, her tactics and strength in the Force impressed him beyond his every expectation. He was of the opinion that at the moment of her death, no Jedi Master lived more fully within the Force than she did. Sadly, her sacrifice like that of her master was in vain, as Lorn Pavan gave into a desire for revenge that ended with a final confrontation with Maul that was only thwarted when Darth Sidious, or should I say Senator Palpatine himself, intervened, thus ensuring the success of the Sith scheme. The events taught each character something new. The hubris of Darth Maul and the danger his arrogance presented to him time and again throughout the tale foreshadowed his defeat at the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi on Naboo. Lorn Pavan learned that while the Jedi were not perfect, the principles they embodied were worthy of respect. When we met him, he hated everything to do with the Jedi. In the wake of Darsha's death, he felt pride knowing his son would one day grow into a being like Darsha Assant. Anun Bandara's fantastic death scene and the enduring example that his sacrifice represented for Darsha opened her eyes to a truth that every Padawan must eventually embrace. Darsha Assant shows us faith in the Force is ultimately nothing without faith in oneself. Now you may be wondering, why only a top 4? Why not a nice round number like top 10 or something like most people would normally do? Well, in actuality, this was originally meant to be a list of the top 15, and I was initially going to take a far more cursory look at each character, but as I realized that I wanted to dissect each character to really go into detail, I truncated the list down to 5, and I actually decided that the 5th and final entry merited his own separate video. Stay tuned, my friends.